Hello guys, and welcome back to the Summer Day Studios YouTube channel. In today's video, I wanted to do something a little bit different. I know I've been making a lot of tutorials, and this is a tutorial in a way, but it's talking more about a topic that I've wanted to cover for a while, and that is making sure that you remember that you're an artist as well. You're not just a technician. I feel like oftentimes when you work on 3D models, when you're a 3D artist, especially if you work with textures or shaders and that sort of thing, things can become very, very technical, and you can get focused on the numbers and the curves. But you've got to remember you're an artist too, first and foremost, right? You're trying to create art and stories through your art. I wanted to use this model that I've been working on recently to kind of go over some of that and to help reinforce some of those points. And I hope this video is interesting for you. It might be a bit slower paced, a bit more rambly. Normally I write up a bit of a script, not a word for word script, but some talking points. And I have a little bit for this video, but nothing crazy. So I'm just going to talk about from my head and my inside really. So, but yeah, I've been working on this for a little while. If some of you might know what this is, some of you might not. It is a Leman Russ battle tank from Warhammer 40k. I've been a massive fan of that franchise for a very long time. I think since I was in high school. I must have been maybe 12, 11 years old that I've been collecting those models. And this in particular is from the Imperial Guard, the Astra militarium as they're known now, which is basically like the regular human army within that universe. And they're made up of like countless billions, if not trillions. And they have these tanks, which is just like the workhorse. And it's a really interesting design to me because it's like this kind of World War I era tank crossed with a more modern tank with the turret. And there's so many little intricate designs in there where the developers of the game, the 40 of Warhammer Games Workshop, they must have considered like where to take this from. And it's such a unique design. I just wanted to make it because I've been collecting this army for a really long time, and I haven't modeled anything in a long time. And it's been really nice to actually make something, but I've been thinking a lot about the topic while modeling this, and I thought I would talk about it a little bit more. So I think when you're modeling, so I've modeled this to reference if I go ahead and hide everything I've made here. And the reference isn't 100% accurate. So the model I've made is a little bit different. But I think that's okay. Within the universe of 40K, there are so many different patterns of things. There are so many different makes, right? Like how you have different makes of cars. Well, there's so many different makes of different vehicles and weapons and armor in the 40K lore. It's a very deep and rich thing. And I'm sure many of you will know that if you're into that. I'm sure some of you will be. And that leaves you a lot of room for creativity, right? So not only are there a lot of different patterns from the factories these are made in, they're called manufactorums on specific planets in the 40k universe. They all have their own unique pattern, right? Like there might be a Mars pattern or a Riser pattern or so on. And there's some as well which go back to like the Horus Heresy, but I'm not going to get into that. This isn't going to become a 40k lore channel or anything, right? Even though I could talk about it for hours. And so for this model, I kind of took a lot of aspects from a regular Leman Russ. I can even show you my reference here. There's a few different variants of a regular Leman Russ, and they look quite kind of simple, very chunky, a bit cute in a way. They're very much like a small little tonk. But there's also these kind of more interesting designs where there's lots more nuts and bolts, look a bit more fresh and detailed. And this version I found as well with these tracks on the back, which turns out those are actually for crossing trenches because the tank's quite short and you don't want it to sink into the trench. So I thought I would add that in there too, because it's meant to sort of extend it so that it doesn't sink in on the back end and crossing the trenches. And I think that's a nice little story touch to this. And, it tells you a little bit more about what this is used for. And that gets into my first point that I've been building towards, is that when you're designing things, remembering that you're an artist, not just a button pusher and a technical artist, you need to consider the story behind what it is you're making. Why does a thing look a certain way? What makes it that way? Where was it made? Who made it? What was it made for? How was it used? Where has it been? All sorts of different things. And a lot of that is going to have an effect on how it looks, right? Like if you think about it in your own life, you probably don't see it, but once you buy something that's brand new, like a pair of shoes, for example, or a car, maybe for a more similar comparison, when you get it, it's brand new, the paint's perfect, it smells new, it doesn't creak, there's no character to it outside of what was designed into it. But once you've used something for a while, once you've driven it around for a while, worn it for a while, it tends to develop a character of its own. Maybe it has a ding here and there, and you can look at that ding and you can think, oh, well, I know where that's from. That's from that one time where maybe I bumped into something or like someone bumped into me, but you have an attachment to that, even though it has these flaws and these little characters, and that's what makes it your thing. And I think it's important that you work that into your models too, because a lot of these models are being used to tell a story, whether they're going to be part of a larger production or not, and that's especially important if you do work in industry, but even for your own art as well, I think. And it's something I try to do as well. So some examples really, and this model is unfinished, by the way. It's got a fair amount of detail on it, but I've put maybe 8 hours or so into this, and I still need to probably do another 4 to get it finished. But I wanted to make this video and use this model to make the point. But I could strip all these extra parts off, right? And it would look a lot more bare bones. But I like to imagine that this, perhaps was a more regular pattern of tank to begin with. But over time, whoever's using this has had to adapt it for the needs of wherever they are. So they've added these kind of like trench rail things on the back here so that it crosses the trenches a bit. There's some fuel tanks on the back that they might have added afterwards and bolted these on. Maybe these aren't regulation to kind of help them go further. There's bits of track up here they might have stuck on just in case they need to repair things. There's bolts all over the place. And various different bits and pieces. There's cables running on the outside, various different sensors and things, and maybe those things were all added. And the plan is to even go even further and add like shovels and backpacks and baggage and stuff. So this really looks lived in. I know, for example, in World War II and World War I, which these vehicles are largely based on, the crew often did basically live in their tank, and they really became this kind of like home in a way, as well as a fighting instrument, which you obviously can't forget by all the different guns and things. Like this thing's got 4 on it. So a lot of that is really, really important. You've got to work that character into your models. But on top of that, you also got to consider the universe that it's made in, and understanding the background and the lore of what you're working on is important, because it gives you more of an insight into how your model should look, what it could function in, the environments it could be in, and it makes it much easier to make something from that universe. And you can take this a step further with the texturing as well. For example, I'm going to texture this, and you can add all sorts of weathering and things. I don't want this to look factory new. I want it to look modified and lived in and used. And I could have just made this look exactly like the reference if I had these, right? And not put any extra creativity into it. And that would be okay too as a technical thing. There's nothing wrong with that model, right? That would be impressive, and this goes for all of you too. If you've made a model that matches your reference 100%, that's a really valuable skill, and you should be proud to be able to do that. And it is something you should practice. But just remember as well, you're an artist too, and it's good to add some artistry to your models and to think about these things, think about the story and the character of the thing that you're making. That necessarily you won't always be doing that, right? If you work for an advertisement studio, you need to make a car model for an advert. Yes, you're just going to make the car, you're not going to bash it up, because then you'd lose your job, right? That's not what you were told to do. So it kind of gets a bit more complicated when you're working in a studio like that. But at least for your own work, and a lot of the time in studios as well, and especially in games and things like that, adding story and character to the things that you make is really, really important. And it just helps bring your models to life a lot more than just matching the reference does, Even some scratches in the right place, or like a handprint maybe on a ladder or something. Maybe, imagine there's like ladder rungs going up this, right? Where they climb up to get in and through this hatch on the top of the turret. And at one point there's like a specific part which is more worn than the rest. Maybe it's on the right side. It might say something like, oh, whoever gets in here is right-footed or something like that. And then maybe has a few notches on it with their initials or something like that. You can really get very, very granular with it. It feels so much more human and grounded in that sense, because even though this is something from a sci-fi universe, and yes, humans do exist in that universe, it helps us relate to it a lot more than it would if it were just very clean and sterile. So maybe on the next project that you work on, whatever that might be, maybe that's something to think about. Maybe it isn't. Really depends on what you're doing. It's up to you as well, right? But something to think about, I think, and it's just something I like to do, and I wanted to share it as well. And I think it's an important topic to talk about, especially in today's day and age with AI, where humans and human-made things often seem less important for people these days, bizarrely. But that's a topic for another video. So thank you very much for watching. If you've got any questions, please do let me know. If you've got any points to add to this as well, I'd love to hear what you think about this too. I think it's an interesting topic that isn't talked about a lot in 3D art. We're always talking about how to make the renders render faster. rather than maybe why we're making what we're making. But yeah, again, like and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching. Any questions at all, please do put those in the comments, and I'll be sure to post more of this in the coming days as well when I do eventually finish it, hopefully if I get the time. But yeah, I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.